Good evening, everyone. I see some folks still joining, but as it's 6 o'clock, we'll go ahead and get started this evening. My name is Megan O'Reilly. I'll be moderating the event this evening, and I'm here on behalf of Anne Arundel County Department of Public Works. Thank you for joining us tonight to learn more about the Our Water program. You will have just seen an alert pop up on your screens that this meeting is being recorded, so if you'd like to view it later, we'll have that up on the project website and we'll give you that information later in the presentation. Let's see, there we go. Thank you, Jessica. Here are a few of the folks you'll be hearing from tonight. You'll be hearing from George Heiner with Anne Arundel County Department of Public Works, Kim Clooney, Lynn Berry, and then Brian Balchunas. You're hearing from me, of course, at the moment, and then Megan Robinson is helping with notes and maybe facilitating some of the chat. Jessica Sneed is also a member of our team, so if you need anything while the meeting is going on, please feel free to reach out to any of us. That can happen on the chat feature on the lower right side of your screen, or simply by unmuting yourself and letting us know that you need something. Excuse me. Tonight's meeting is being hosted on Zoom. Thank you for joining us on this platform. I would direct you to the bottom side of your screen, the two left buttons. You can mute yourself or stop video. For bandwidth reasons, we do ask that we are off video when not speaking, just so that the presentation runs smoothly. You'll see the raise hand feature in the reactions menu also along that bottom bar. And then if you'd like to be unmuted, again, that's to the left, far side. And then if you're having any trouble with audio, please let us know and feel free to dial into the number that's provided there. If you have any trouble throughout, feel free to ping either Jessica Sneed or myself and we can get you that contact information. Perfect. All right, so let's spend a minute talking about the purpose of tonight's meeting. What we'd like to do is share more information about the Our Water program. We've gotten interest from residents in the community and we're excited to be here to talk to you about it. I do want to note that tonight's meeting is non-binding, so we're not asking you to make any kind of decision during this session or vote on anything. It's more to information share and answer any questions that we can. So you can learn more about the project and make an informed decision moving forward. Please note that, this is a community decision, so once we get to share all this information with you, you'll get to have that larger conversation about whether this is something you want to move forward with or not. And then something to mention, yep, perfect. We'll go through, excuse me, Jessica, you can keep going. I wanted to pull up the agenda for this evening and talk you through what we'll be covering. We'll talk through the Our Water program generally and how it affects your community, funding and cost associated with it, and then the process moving forward. So from this meeting, the application and petition process, and then finally finishing up with next steps in Q&A. This information is technical, so as you have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to throw those in the chat box and we can respond to those. We'll also have the technical team available at the end of the meeting. If you have any additional questions, we'll hang tight and be available to answer those. All right, perfect. So with that, George, I will pass over to you for a quick introduction and the beginning of slides.
Okay, thanks, Megan. So I'm George Heiner with the Anne Arundel County Department of Public Works in the Utility Design Division. And I'm going to be speaking at a couple of different places tonight. At the beginning here, I'm going to talk about the Our Water program and what are some of our goals are with the program. And then a little later, I'll be talking about the application process. As Megan mentioned, there's going to be a lot of information in the meeting tonight, so we would encourage you to put questions in the chat box. And as we pause as we go, we'll pause as we go through the presentation, and we'll try to catch up on the questions. So, what is the Our Water program? So the Our Water program is a long-term strategy that DPW has developed to improve the health of our waterways and the Chesapeake Bay and strengthen our water resiliency. Can you go to the next slide? So the program has 5 elements to it. One element is what we're calling small system upgrades. This is an effort we're going to look at trying to upgrade small wastewater treatment plants at places like mobile home parks to improve their performance. We have a very robust stormwater management improvement program That's funded through the stormwater fee. They've made progress on a lot of different areas, and so that's an ongoing program that's very robust. There's going to be a groundwater resiliency effort, and then wastewater treatment enhancements. The county has invested a large amount, and then state also through the BRF fund in improvement for wastewater treatment plants. They're currently achieving very high levels of nutrient removal, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But we're going to try to continue that high improvement and see where we can enhance that. And the last piece that we're talking about specifically tonight is the septic to sewer connection program. So can you go to the next slide? So why are we interested in connecting septic systems? So the main reason is really focusing on nitrogen pollution into the Chesapeake Bay and the waterways actually within Anne Arundel County. So a conventional septic system does not remove nitrogen very effectively. And in a lot of areas, the septic systems are a significant contributor to the watershed. So our wastewater treatment facilities are right now removing more than 90% of the pollution from nitrogen, and actually it would exceed what's happening at a conventional septic system by a large margin. So our interest is really in trying to take advantage of the performance at the wastewater treatment plants to help lower the nutrient loads. Can you go to the next slide? So Anne Arundel County has a lot of septic systems because there's over 500 miles of shorelines, and because of the nature of the way the area developed, there are a lot of communities on septic systems, close to over 40,000 septic systems in Anne Arundel County. 13,000 are in the critical area, which means they're within 1,000 feet of a tidal waterway. That's actually 25% of all the critical area septic systems in the state are actually here in Anne Arundel County. And they are a significant source of nitrogen in the county waterways, and all of the county watersheds are listed as impaired for nutrients and other parameters. So there is a significant local impact as well as the overall impact on the Chesapeake Bay. Can you go to the next slide? So what are some of the benefits to the septic connection, to a septic connection project? As I just mentioned, there's less total nitrogen discharged into the bay. That we have a Chesapeake Bay total maximum daily load. If you've heard of that, it's kind of what they call the pollution diet for the Chesapeake Bay. As we are able to hook up some of these septic systems, we can lower the load into those waterways. So it'll help us maintain compliance with the state's requirements. And there will also be a positive impact on the local waterways. As I mentioned before, nearly all the county waterways are listed as impaired for nutrients and other pollutants. So for the homeowner, there can also be some benefits. These are very site specific and they don't necessarily apply to everybody's situation, but they are possible benefits that we've heard other people mention, and so we just want to review those quickly. So in some cases, your ability to build an addition onto your home can be restricted based on your septic system. So if you were to switch to a public sewer, that kind of limitation would be alleviated. There's also drain fields and future drain fields that have to be designated for septic systems, whether those are in front of your house or behind. That space, if you were to hook up to the public sewer, would be available for other uses. And there may be a positive impact on your home value. Again, that's the kind of thing that's very site specific. And so, if that was something you were really interested in learning about more, we would advise that you talk to a realtor about that. Can you go to the next slide? Also, there's less risk of contamination of a drinking water well, and there's often this schematic is in order to put the information together. We're showing the well a lot closer than it would normally be to a septic field. But as you probably know, I think everybody here is probably on well water, I believe, as well as the septic system. So there's setbacks required there. And if the septic systems were decommissioned, then that would remove a potential drinking water contamination source. We've already mentioned the improvements to the local waterways. There are also maintenance costs associated with septic systems. And if you were to switch to public sewer, while you would be paying the public sewer bill, you wouldn't be paying the septic maintenance costs. Can you go to the next slide? So we have some of these costs, and these are kind of general figures that we've pulled from information that on the state's website and some other places. So things that you would normally be spending money on with your septic system, like the pump outs, and what can become significant is a drain field replacement. I think as we've researched this, that is the most expensive replacement that can be associated with your septic system. And then through the best available technology, those are the nitrogen removal systems. Those actually are mechanically and electrically more complicated than a traditional septic system, so they cost a bit more to run as a homeowner. And but the drain field issue is the same if it comes up. So we have overall a need in our area to improve our waterways and in the environment and water quality. We've developed this septic connection process, which is really a modification to the existing petition process, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. And our goal with this overall program is to try to connect up to 6,000 septic systems over the next 30 years. So our target here is 200 homes per year. So the original planning for this started quite some time ago with an earlier phase of the Chesapeake Bay improvement program that the state was developing, where we were looking at connecting up to 20,000 of these 40,000 septic systems. So we had developed a lot of planning level layouts for that. And we convened a septic task force to help us get input from people within the community. And that task force really helped us with developing policies, prioritization criteria, and changes to the petition legislation, some of which we're going to talk about tonight. And also probably the most significant piece was the development of the subsidies and other incentives. So that task force effort really culminated earlier this year and at the end of last year with the county council passing legislation to enable DPW to offer subsidies on septic connection projects in certain areas, and then a partial deferment of the annual assessment for, again, eligible areas. And we have also developed sort of to implement that program, a process and application process to help guide that program. And that's what we're going to talk about in more detail about tonight. In this map, just to give you an idea of what area we're talking about and generally for the program. So the green area is the planned service areas in the county for sewer. The blue is eligible areas for the program, and to be an eligible area, you needed to be either in a septic system problem area. It's called the on-site wastewater management problem area. The area could be in the critical area. If the area was in one of the areas that we had determined looked like they could be hooked up to public sewers. If we had a layout for that area from our earlier studies, we included that as an eligible area. And then if you're in a project area that includes like one of these blue areas, you could be eligible as well. So this particular neighborhood is eligible because it's in the critical area. So here we have a potential service area, and what's shown here is an area that we looked at as a drainage area, two drainage areas actually, that we felt these homes could be connected by, in this case, a gravity sewer line. And the county has a sewer that runs just, it's not shown on this diagram, but it's actually just to the east of the community there. And that's how we would be able to connect in to these areas. And when we are, one thing I guess to point out is in the petition process, what is happening is the residents in an area are requesting Public Works to extend sewer to their area, or water. There's actually a water petition process. So the request is really from the residents to the local government saying, will you extend public service to our area? And that area is defined by the residents who submit the petition. So we're showing kind of a possible area that could be served, but there isn't not a project area that has been set, and there is no DPW project that we have in mind. So that was one thing I want to clarify, because I think sometimes when we've spoken to some other communities, there's been a perception that we have a specific project in mind, which is not actually the case.
George, we've had a couple questions come in. One from Miss Jennifer Grief that we'll cover in the next section on the cost specific to the neighborhood. And then a second asking for the definition of a critical area for the program versus a critical area for the Chesapeake Bay.
It's the same definition. So if we have that kind of stuff mapped, so if it's in that critical area, then it's that same critical area.
Hey, George, I did want to clarify too that the Crain West area here, I'm not sure everybody would be in the critical area, but it also is a septic to sewer eligible area, an area that the county had looked at previously. So that is
so we had a layout for this area. Okay.
That's correct. That's correct.
Brian, to that point, I'm seeing a message from Ms. Collins for a drain field replacement, and being told that they were not part of the critical area there. So appreciate that input.
Yeah.
Okay, we ready to move on, George?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, good evening. My name's Brian Belchunas. I'm with HDR. We're an engineering firm helping out the county on this. So I wanted to cover costs and funding and what that means to you as the homeowners. And we're kind of going to do this in a couple different parts. First, talk specifically about what it costs from a project perspective to put in sewer. And then we'll talk about potential available funds to pay for those costs. And then we'll translate that into what it means for the individual homeowner. So the typical per property cost to connect, and these are the initial cost that it takes to build a project. There are really three components, and you can see them on the pie chart there. The biggest piece of that pie, the dark blue, is the public side cost. This is the cost for installing the infrastructure in the right of way to collect the sewage and convey it to the county's water reclamation facilities. As George said, this community is adjacent to an existing sewer that runs just to the east of the community. We do think it could connect to that sewer without a pump station, which is a benefit. Many of these areas that we look at do require a pump station, which increase those project costs. But again, this big blue piece is the overall cost to construct the local sewer system in the right of way. There are private on-site costs, and these are the costs on your property, the things you need to do on your property to connect to the public sewer. So in the diagram there, the county will build the sewer in the public right of way, and then just inside the property line will build what's called a clean out for the sewer connection. And then the homeowner is responsible for all other costs to get the sewer to that clean out. And this includes abandoning the existing septic tank, which we'll talk about here in a minute. And then the third piece of the pie here is what's called the capital facility connection charge. And this is really paying for already built infrastructure. You're going to connect into the rest of the county's collection and wastewater treatment systems. And so this charge is to pay for the debt service of that already built infrastructure. So it did say abandonment of the septic tank is part of the private side costs. You do need to abandon septic systems when a property is connected to public sewer. This requires the service of a licensed disposal contractor or waste hauler to pump out the tank. And then typically you can go to the county's website and find out more information. If you have a concrete septic tank, it would just be filled in with stone. If you had a metal septic tank, it would need to be crushed to avoid future collapse. So if we look at it,
Brian, before we get to this slide, I just wanted to, I was just looking at this while we were talking. So this area does not appear to be in the critical area. So we'll need to fix that slide kind of going forward. It would be eligible because we have developed a layout for the area. It seems like we're right on the boundary of the critical area, but the critical area is just to the south of the area.
And I did want to, there was one question about our property is not in the managed area in red in 920 West Benfield. So as George said, those, that's, when the county laid that out, it was kind of in a different drainage area. So you are eligible for this program and the subsidies that come with the program. And since you could be included in the area if Crain's West wanted to petition or to seek service, that home could also be included. Yes. Okay, so the county, as George said, did quite a few different layouts and looked at potential costs for constructing this project. And you can see on this histogram the range of per property project costs. So this is, again, that public side cost. Crain West is kind of right in the middle. Again, you have the advantage of not needing a pump station, which can lower the overall project costs. The things that contribute to project costs are property size. Smaller properties, you get more bang for the buck with the sewer. The proximity to the existing system, which you are very close to the existing system. How deep the sewers need to go, whether you need a grinder pump, if some areas can be topographically challenged to flow by gravity, and a few homes may need what's called a grinder pump to pump into the sewer system. Whether a pump station is required, which it is not here, how much surface restoration, street closures. So a lot of things go into these project costs. What we've done to date is a very desktop-based study. If a project were to move forward, these costs would be refined throughout the process before it got to the point where you would have to vote on an assessment. The next side is the private on-site cost, and you see a little different shape to this histogram. Most projects for these on-site costs would be less than, say, $8,000 per property, but you do see a little bump at the higher costs on the right-hand side, and that's really, these are heavily dictated by the property size, how far your house is from the public right-of-way, so how much sewer you have to install on your property, what the topography of your property is, and how deep those sewers would need to go, and then whether you would have significant property or driveway restoration. The good news on this, when we get to the funding, just to give you a little preview, is that there are state funds available to help defer these private on-site costs, and we'll touch on that in a little bit. But before we go there, I'll pause to see if there's any questions. As I said, we're going to cover kind of the funding side of things next, but if there's any questions on costs. Okay, I'll keep going then. So the potential funding sources, traditionally, if a community went to petition the county for extension of service, as George mentioned before, that community would be 100% responsible for all project costs, on-site costs, private costs, etc. There are some other funding sources now through some of the legislation that George talked about and through some state programs to help offset some of those costs. So as George mentioned, through the legislation, the county has authorized for these eligible areas a subsidy of up to 25% of the total project cost. So that would reduce the assessment amount by up to 25% of that project cost. The state also has funding sources, and these are through what's called the Bay Restoration Fund grants. That Bay Restoration Fund, George mentioned previously, was used to help construct the wastewater treatment plant upgrades, and now that most of those are done, we're seeking funding for these types of connections. That grant can be applied to private side costs, so it can directly offset that kind of out-of-pocket cost for the connections. And then the remaining costs are passed on to the homeowner through an annual assessment. The county will take advantage of low-interest state loans to reduce the homeowner annual costs, and we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get into the assessment. So I did just want to touch on the subsidies. So the county is now in an application project for eligible areas to apply for this subsidy. Based on the applications that they receive, they will rank those projects based on a number of factors, including costs and environmental benefit, etc., and choose which projects may be eligible for the 25% subsidy. There is in the statute an income verification for that to get the full 25% income. Annual gross household income must be less than $300,000. If income is greater than that, it would be 12.5% of the property cost. This mimics what the state does for Bay Restoration Fund grants. So the project subsidy really directly reduces the assessment. It's the county chipping in to pay for a piece of this cost. And they are, as George mentioned, a new feature help to try and make these projects more affordable. The Bay Restoration Fund can be used for the on-site costs, as I've mentioned several times. Can also, if you have bay restoration funding left over can be used to pay off the capital facility connection charge. This funding directly to pay for those on-site costs would be administered through the health department. Same income limits as the subsidy funding, may be up to $20,000. If you are higher than 300,000 annual gross income, then that would be $10,000. It is up to the state and the legislation to continue this program and continue the funding available. And these funds are not directly provided to you. It would be made to the licensed master plumber to pay. So you would work with a licensed master plumber to get quotes and work with the health department, but the funds would go from the health department to the master plumber.
So Brian, why don't we catch up on these these last two questions? So the one about what is the approval timeline for the BRF application? So that's, in this particular area, that's kind of a complicated question, because one of the factors that goes into the BRF funding is whether you're in a pre-designated priority funding area. And this particular neighborhood is completely surrounded by priority funding areas, but it's not part of the priority funding area. So if there was interest in this area, that's something we would need to talk to planning and zoning, and I think there's a way you can appeal to the smart growth committee. And so funding, BRF funding, that's like kind of an extra hurdle that we would need to go through. Not kind of an extra hurdle, it's an extra hurdle that we would have to go through on a project. Because I think if you were sort of to make a phone call out of the blue right now and say, here's my address, am I eligible? You might be told, no, you're not eligible for BRF funding. So we would be working, if there was an interest, we would be working on that to get that into place, because that's a really important component, I think, this BRF funding for the septic systems in terms of making it affordable. So I guess it was a long-winded way to say it's difficult to predict the timeline, because we would have to get through that process to get that funding lined up for this neighborhood. The next question was, is there the public cost, is the total cost per home? Yeah, for the county to construct what would be a county capital project. And we'll talk a lot more about the assessments and the deferments coming up, but basically the residents reimburse the county for the public side of the cost through an assessment, and the residents have to pay the private cost on their own. But most of that cost should be able to be paid through the BRF septic grant. And the historic data that we presented was just to give everybody an understanding of what the ranges of the costs are that we've seen. That data actually came from the health department for reimbursements that they issued. So the next question was, do we know what the surrounding communities are planning to do that would hurt or help costs and access to BRF funds if they are in the priority funding, like Pointfield? So Pointfield Landing recently had a petition that was voted down, but that was prior to this program starting. And I don't really know if they would be interested in reconsidering, but I mean, they're not part of the drainage area we had in mind here. I think it's conceivable that generally larger projects are more cost effective, but in this case, since we had two drainage areas and they don't go through that Pointfield area, it wouldn't be necessary to include them. And in terms of how would it hurt the access to the BRF funds, I don't know that it would really impact it. As Brian said, there's a certain amount of funds available from the state. If we were fortunate enough to have a lot of projects, we would figure out, how to sequence that.
Thank you, George. And I think you answered a few of the questions about, if asking surrounding communities to do this now would be helpful. One question we do still have to cover is asking about the application and if that's made by the community or by individual homeowners. I know we'll cover that later in the slides, but if we could give a quick response there.
Which question, Megan? Sorry.
Sure, no, that's quite all right. The question about the application being made by the community as a whole or by
okay, sorry. We'll talk more about the applications later. So I'd like to probably defer that one for now. I see a question, who's responsible for the CFCC cost? So the homeowner is responsible for that. And as Brian was mentioning, that can be included as something that can be reimbursed through the BRF fund. And then the last question I see is would it help if we asked other communities to do this now? I don't think it would hurt if there was an interest in another community. If other communities aren't going, do you have more access to the funds? I think that's I think that's probably accurate. Would there be a time when the county forces homeowners to connect? I don't see that right now. Part of the overall 5-component strategy is to help us. We are on track with our nutrient loads right now. So part of this plan is the 5 prongs and the septic connections is to figure out how do we stay compliant going forward. So if we can be able to get 200 homes to hook up over this time period, that'll help us stay compliant. And I think somebody's saying, yes, it would happen if water quality continued to decline. Yes, I think that's the reverse of if we're not making progress towards these goals or any of our other goals, there could be a change in the approach. Yeah, that's true. Sorry, Brian, I jumped in on.
No, that was great. Thanks, George, for tackling those. So now let's talk about how the costs kind of translate into the property costs. And I see a question just came in about front footage, and we'll answer that as we go through this. So the costs for the project, start through estimates on engineering study of what it's going to take for a contractor to build this project. Then to get to project costs, there are other things that the county has to pay for, like site investigation, survey. They may have to drill borings for geotechnical information, design easements if needed, inspections, overhead that get added to that construction cost for a total project cost. And then a net assessable amount is calculated by taking that total project cost. If for some reason, I don't think it would be applicable here, but if for some reason some infrastructure was getting built larger to serve future areas, the county would deduct that increase in infrastructure to pay for that large future service area. The county would deduct if there are any state funds that would be paid not to the homeowner but directly to the county to offset these assessments. That would be subtracted, and then added in is that the county incurred interest over the life of the project. As I said before, the county would look to get very low interest loans from the state to proceed with this work. And so that is then the total net assessable amount, and your individual assessment would be that net assessable amount divided by 40 years. One of the other things the county legislation did was extend the payback of this this assessment over 40 years instead of what was done previously at 30 years. So then the assessment is taking advantage of the county subsidy as well. That would get subtracted from the net assessable amount. So we're going to run through some examples. I want to emphasize that these are examples. Jess, if you could go to the next slide. And so we've made some assumptions for an assessment basis. We have assumed that, as we talked about, there's about $20,000 per property available from the state. For this analysis, we assumed $15,000 of that went to the homeowner to pay for those on-site costs and capital facility connection charge, and $5,000 per property went to the county to lower the overall assessment. Those households earning less than $300,000 per year will get the benefit of the subsidy. There is an option to defer for everybody in the area, and Kim will talk a little bit more about deferment, but you do have the option to defer 50% of that, your total assessment, to be paid at a later date. There also is an existing county code availability for elderly, low income, or permanently disabled that you can defer 100% of the assessment, and that those deferred payments become payable at a later date. And as I said, Kim will talk about that here in a minute. And then, as I said, $15,000 of BRF funding to help cover those on-site costs. If for the households greater than $300,000 a year, the subsidy and the BRF fundings are cut by 50%. And then if there are any vacant lots, those would not get a subsidy or deferment or BRF. They would still pay the assessment. Obviously, they would not have any connection charges or on-site charges because there would be no on-site work required. So if we roll that up and include in there the question that was asked earlier, the annual costs for sewer service, we get a range of potential costs as shown on this chart. And just focusing on the first bar, the subsidy only, you can see that range is about $1,600 to $2,500 per year. So this is taking advantage of the subsidy, but not taking advantage of any deferred payments. These numbers do include the sewage usage charge, which is for areas that don't have public water, is a flat rate, which is currently $35 per month or $105 per quarter. That's based on the county's average use by other households, as you wouldn't have a meter at your house. So $420 out of this $1,500 to $2,500 yearly cost is your usage charge. So the other $1,100 to $2,100 per year would be the assessment. If you do take the 50% deferment, that $1,100 to $2,100 per year would get cut in half. So your total out of pocket per year would be $1,000 to $1,500. We have ranges here because of the uncertainty of what it would take to construct this project. We expect that the cost would fall towards the middle of this range, but until we do additional engineering analysis and confirm up a cost estimate, we need to present some ranges on these numbers. You can see the 100% deferment, your payment is just the usage charge, and then you see the high income and vacant lots, and can answer any questions if there are on those. Importantly, the assessment, I didn't really cover it, but the code was changed, so it is no longer a front foot assessment, so you're not paying footage charges. It is what's called a per equivalent dwelling unit. What that means for a residential house is your one equivalent dwelling unit. So the total assessment cost, the assessable amount, is divided by the total number of equivalent dwelling units. So basically every residential house would pay the same amount. Okay. So the assessment options, we've covered some of this previously. The private costs would look to cover most of that through the Bay Restoration Fund grants. Anything that is not covered would be due 100% at the time of connection. The capital facility connection charge, again, if there's BRF funding left over, you could use that. You could choose to pay it up front if at the time of connection, or it can be financed over 40 years, anything that's remaining after BRF funds are applied, and it would roll into your assessment payment. And then the assessment, there is no ability to pay for the assessment upfront. It does need to be paid for over the 40 years, and you have the option to defer up to 50%. And so I'm going to turn it over to Kim to talk a little bit more about the deferral.
So there are two deferral options that are available, and this is not an either or that you fall into one category or the other. The partial deferral is for anyone that is within the project area, has this as an option, and you can choose to defer up to 50% of the 40-year assessment cost until your home is sold or 40 years. So just as an example, if your 40-year total assessment is $60,000, that yearly assessment without the deferral would be $1,500 per year. You could choose up to 50% deferral, which would be to defer that $30,000, and that would lower your yearly assessment to $750 per year. Once you sell the house, though, you would be required to pay that $30,000 off at the time of transfer or after the 40 years. And then the next owner would continue to make those $750 per year payments until the 40 years is complete. So you would be paying the annual payment of $750 a year up until the time that you sell the house, and then the next owner would continue to pay that $750 per year until the 40 years is completed. Okay, next slide. The full deferral repayment is a little bit different. This has eligibility requirements to be either elderly and low income or to be disabled. And this actually defers individual payments instead of a set amount. But this would defer the entire 100% of each payment. So in this instance, if your 40-year assessment was $60,000 using the same criteria that we had from the other one, 100% of each payment of $1,500 per year would be deferred. So each yearly assessment would be zero. But then when you transfer the house, you would have to pay back all of the deferred individual payments. So if, for example, if you sell the house after 10 years, you would have deferred 10 payments of $1,500, which would mean that you would pay back the $15,000 that you deferred. And then the next homeowner would continue to pay the $1,500 per year until the 40 years is paid off. Okay, next slide. So this is just kind of putting side by side those two different programs. And you can see in the far right corner, if you did the 50% deferment, that you would be paying back the $30,000 that you deferred whenever you sold the house. However, if you had the elderly and disabled deferment, after 5 years, you would be paying back 5 payments or $7,500. After 10 years, you would be paying back the $15,000. After 15 years would be $22,500, and for 20 years, it would be 30,000. And I saw someone had asked in the chat that what it is defined, elderly is defined as 60 or over, and there are income limits based off of the size of the household. All right, you can go to the next slide. All right, do we want to, see if there's any other questions?
Sorry, I was trying to talk, but I have myself muted. So the question of, does the cost estimate chart assume approval of the BRF grant? Yes, it does. So that's why I was mentioning that would be an extra step in this area. We'd have to, either get it into the priority funding area somehow or get it approved by the Smart Growth Committee. Because beyond just the BRF grant, which of course it would impact your funding for your private site costs, it affects the loan rate, which would significantly affect the assessment. So, it would, and we would be, if there was a job moving forward, we would be communicating all this, but the numbers we're showing right now are assuming that we're going to get through those hurdles. In that, so with the BRF grant and the loan rate as well. Would it be possible to see an estimate without including the BRF grant? We could do that. I don't know, Kim, I don't remember how much. It's significantly more because we'd be using the county's regular bond rate. And then if you weren't getting the BRF grant for your on-site funds, that you'd have that on-site cost, so that most of it's between 4,000 to 8,000, and then a few places it's more than that. If you do not defer payments and choose to sell to the next owner, have the ability to choose to defer.
They do not.
Is that right? Okay, yeah.
That is correct. It would be the owner of the house whenever we go to connect. That owner would have that option to defer. The next owner would not have that option. They would continue with whatever the payment is that's currently on that house.
Yeah. So I just on the BRF, we're just trying to share all that, the information we have. It gets a little confusing. I know we already have a chart with 5 different bars on it, but I think we could make a good case, for it. So I'm thinking we could get, that approved, honestly, but there's a process that we'd have to go through. We could post, actually, we'll talk a little bit later about, we can provide some information and how we can share information. So we could come up with the numbers without the BRF. They'll be high, I'm just telling you that, but we can do that. And before we move on to the next process, or the next stage, the one thing I wanted to mention was the change from the front foot assessment to the per lot assessment. That was also one of the changes that came out of the recent legislation. There were a few more administrative changes to the petition process. We're talking mostly tonight about the subsidy and the deferment because of the ones that are affecting the cost, but that change to the per lot was one of the other changes that was in the legislation, and that was a reflection to a great extent of some of the comments we got through the task force about the corner lots in particular. Okay, so let's go to the application and petition process. So we have developed a process here. So we have targeted a large number of potential projects, and we're able to offer a subsidy through the new code changes. But we couldn't practically offer a subsidy to every possible project, right? So we developed an application and ranking system that really precedes the formal petition process. So we're just going to talk through that here on the next few slides. One thing we want to point out is tonight's meeting is really the beginning of the beginning. So it's, there was some interest in the community. So we've been doing these meetings. I think our first one was in June. We'll be doing meetings through November just to let people know about the program changes and try to share the possible costs as far as we know them. So if a community so this is what we call our pre-application information meeting. If there's some interest in making an application, we'll talk about how to do that. We would review and rank the application. If its area is one that we might offer a subsidy to, we would have a follow-up community meeting because we would refine the costs. We look at the layouts a little more closely. We would have a second meeting where we would present that what we call a conceptual cost estimate. At that point, the next step would be for the community to actually start the formal petition process. So that begins with forms will go out to the community, all the homeowners in a potential project area, and people have an opportunity to say whether they're interested in petitioning or not. You need a majority within a defined petition area in order for a petition to go forward. If that goes forward, it goes to my group in utility design. We would do an engineering study called a preliminary engineering report or a schematic design report. We would develop, as Brian mentioned before, we would be further developing, so the construction cost estimates and the project cost estimates, and then we would have a public hearing for that. And at that point, we would also present a ballot to vote on, or information on what so the ballot would basically be, that's the formal part of the process. And in the ballot, you would be indicating whether you agree to the assessment or not. If the vote moves forward and it's a majority, the majority is needed to move forward. So it's 50% plus one vote, whatever that number is. Then we will move ahead with preparing final designs and construct the system. So that's the overall process. So the application steps like 1 and 2 that we're in right now, none of these are binding. Step 3 is not really binding because you're just requesting the petition evaluation. It's the step 4 vote on the petition that becomes binding.
So George, to jump into a couple of those questions, I know you covered majority as 50% plus 1. Timeline for completion, we actually have along the bottom bar of this. So step 2, that about 3 months, followed by 9 months, another 3 months, and then the 2.5 years. And yes, that would be linear. George, if there's anything you'd like to add there.
I mean, they're linear. The only thing is we need to figure out where in this process, maybe when we got to the point where we had a formal petition to start talking to the state about this funding area thing. So in this case, there'll be like this parallel timeline for that. But we would still have to be moving ahead with the design and all of those elements. So I don't know that would, it's just something we would have to do. I don't know it would impact the timeline that greatly. Let's see, could you go to the next slide? So this is a little more detail on the petition process. The community, as I mentioned, there'll be petition forms that will define a project area. And those petitions are signed by the homeowners. They're sent back to the county to verify. If there's a majority, again, that's 50% plus 1 vote. We'll do a preliminary engineering study. We'll present the information at a public hearing where we'll talk about basically the engineering options that we looked at, what we think the construction costs are up through the ballot, we would do the assessment ballot, would also be talked about at the hearing. The ballots would then be mailed out, and after the results are sent in, they'll be tallied up. If you don't respond to a ballot, it's counted as a no. So in order to be counted as a yes, it has to be an affirmative yes. Can you go to the next slide? So one thing I guess we want to emphasize with the vote is if the majority decides to proceed with the project, all the residents in the area have to connect. That's an important thing to understand about the process. So the 51% can make the 49% connect. So it's good to communicate within the neighborhood about where everybody is on the potential project. And once that vote was approved, the step 6 is really the county going through its final design step. We prepare the plans and specifications. We'll do our construction advertisement. We'll hire the contractor. When the work is completed, we send out a letter to all the residents in the project area that would say the work is complete and it's ready to be released for service. At that time, residents have 9 months to connect. And as I mentioned, everybody in the project area has to connect. You can get an extenuation or an exemption on the 9-month connection if you recently installed a septic system or a BAT system. But even if you were given sort of an extension on the connection time, the assessment would still apply. And the assessments begin usually the first calendar year after the project is completed. So the ballot assessment that's presented at the time of the ballot vote is our best estimate of what the project costs are going to be based on that basically 30% design effort. The final assessment is based on the actual project costs at the end. So the question is, I see a question in the chat. So if an individual property did not want to apply and the community approved it, would they be forced to connect and charge? So yes, that's a possibility. Yes. Well, yes, in most cases that would be the situation. The only you may get a waiver on the connection timeline if you recently had a septic system installed. But that is how it works, yes. And I mean, primarily that's from a financial standpoint. The county can't afford to extend sewer into areas and not have connections made from a financial standpoint.
And George, along those same lines, a question about the assessment, if that's rolled into the yearly property tax bill or how that's taken across.
Kim, can you answer that?
Yeah, the assessment is a separate bill that would come, it's billed in January. So it's a separate bill.
Perfect, thank you, Kim. And then George, may I ask you to talk a bit, or George or Brian, about the management area, how those are being defined and how that affects, what's considered to be the project area?
So, yeah, sure, I can talk to this one. So there is not a defined project area right now. So in the petition project, the actual area is whatever area is designated when the petition comes in from the residents. As we mentioned earlier, when we were looking at the possibility of connecting a much larger group of septic systems, we did more of a desktop conceptual evaluation of where did we see areas in the county that we might be able to hook up to public sewer. And so the boundary, like the burgundy boundary on the map, and I forget which slide, it was early on in the slide deck. Let me see which one that was. It's slide 17. Can we go to slide 17? Was based on that desktop evaluation. So the actual project area could include some of those houses that, aren't necessarily in that boundary right now. We had some very general criteria when we were working on these layouts about the size of the lots and some other things that we really needed to do on an aggregate level when we were just looking at places all over the county. So, we could definitely refine the edges of an area. Yeah, there it is. So, I guess the other thing too that is one thing, and we would talk, if there's an interest, we'll talk to whoever, is a community representative or spokesperson about some of the details. But a project area needs to be continuous from where it connects to the county system to the end of the project area. So if we're going down a street, like all the houses on both sides of the street have to be in, but a side street does not necessarily have to be in, right? So and that's so we can kind of grow the system from the existing line outwards. So there's a couple of constraints in terms of setting up the project area, but we can talk about that if there's interest in that. Which communities are on septic systems in the area? Let me see. If you give me a minute, I can look that one up. I know Pointfield Landing is on septics. The area to the east is not, because that's where our sewer line is. Let me see here.
That's something we can
Pointfield Landing is, I would say, the one big community in the area that is on septic.
Yeah.
Properties around Veterans Highway and the other side of 97 are all on septic, but most of the... And I was just scrolling through the map saying, what's this big area to the east? And then I read, yes, it's Chartwell. So, okay. Yes.
And yeah, and we actually spoke with Chartwell, I want to say probably back in July. We did a similar presentation for that.
George, there was a question I think we might have missed earlier that was asking about connecting public water at the same time as sewer.
Oh, yes, you're right. Good catch. Yes. So there is an existing petition process for water, and there's one for sewer. And so we've only been talking tonight about the petition process as it relates to sewer extensions, because that's really what the emphasis of this particular program is, the septic connection. An area can apply for a water petition, and you could apply to have both. You would vote on them. We would basically price them out as if they were separate projects, and you would have an opportunity to vote on both of them, and then if they're done, we can do them together. So yes, you could petition for water. I do see that there's water around the area as well. And generally, we've seen more water petitions go forward than sewer petitions because they are less costly generally than the sewer petitions. Although I would just remind everyone, so the program elements that we're talking about tonight, like the subsidies and the BRF grants and the deferment, those are only for septic systems. And the water system, even the 40-year payback period, is only for septic system. The water system doesn't have those elements. So is there a question, is it more cost efficient to do both at the same time? Yes, it is. And if we present them as standalone, because administratively they're sort of a water project and a sewer project, but if both were voted forward, when we did the design, we would be doing one design for water and sewer. And so that there would be some savings, and that would be reflected in the final assessment at the end of the project. But at the time we did the ballot, we wouldn't know if the water would go forward. Let's say you wouldn't know if the water went forward and the sewer didn't go forward. So that's why we keep them separate when an area is petitioning for both. That's why we keep them separate initially. Is there a ballpark estimate to do both? We could look into that a little more. I think we've been asked that at some other communities. So let us look into that. Let's see.
One more question we had there, George, was about repairs after work is done. So replacing the street, recurbing, sort of what recovery happens after work would be completed.
So normally we would prefer to patch the road in accordance with our road, guidelines. We would take a look at the existing road condition to see if that's appropriate. If there's a water project also, it becomes more likely that we would be resurfacing the road. So that one's a little hard to answer. Paving actually adds quite a bit to a project, although it's really important from an aesthetic standpoint. So, it's normally we would try to pave as little as we can in order to keep the cost down, but we would need to look at the condition of the existing road and then whether we're doing water work, because typically we want to keep the water lines and the sewer lines separated also. So when you're doing both, you end up working in both sides of the street.
Susan, I see. Sorry,
Okay.
Sorry, Brian or George. Susan, I see your hand raised. Did we answer it with that last question, or do you still have one?
I just have a quick question. So, has any, how sometimes we can get a bond bill introduced for certain projects within a legislative district? Has any community ever successfully petitioned for a bond bill for this type of work to offset the costs? And my other question is, with the amount of money that we have in the budget surplus and the infrastructure bill that's going to be passed, do you think there's a likelihood that this might be a good time to strike because there might be more available public funding to offset the cost to homeowners?
It's a great question. George, I'm going to toss it to you.
Kim, can you answer the bond bill one?
So generally, we don't necessarily do the bond bill for these types of projects. It's something that we could look into if that's something that is there, but generally those increase your tax rate in your district to pay for them, so it's kind of the same as us.
No, I'm talking about state money that is given to legislative districts for they got a bond bill for the Sperner Park Community Center that didn't increase our tax rates. So I'm talking about a specific. I just wonder if it's allowed. It might not be allowed under the bond bill rules, but I'm just wondering if, because there's going to be so much money next year for the budget. Just gobs of money.
So where we get the funding for this type of money is through the state revolving fund, which is for the clean water, and those are either a low interest loan, which is the low interest loans that we talked about earlier. There are grants that are from that, but they're competitive and they go through EPA approval. So we apply for grants and loans as part of the project. So it's all subject to whether our project gets approved against all of the other projects in the state.
Sure. I guess my question is, because Anne Arundel has such a significant portion of the septic problem in the Bay watershed, would it behoove the county delegation, the state representatives and with the support from Pittman, to support a special additional money put in the BRF or in the Bay Restoration Program, whatever it would be, to to do a one-time sort of large swath of communities that are in these critical areas or close to the critical areas, as in our case, because it's just so cost prohibitive for so many people. And I'm just wondering, while we have this huge amount of money, if we could get the backing of Department of Public Works and the environmental folks in the county and the state leadership, and I mean the state representatives in the General Assembly, if we could maybe put together some sort of massive infrastructure, funded. I mean, $5 billion is a lot of money to be spent in the next, fiscal year. And I'm just wondering
are you referring to the American Rescue Plan money, or
no? This is not. This is additional revenue. It's $2.5 billion additional from fiscal year 21, and an additional $2 million something that's anticipated for FY 22. That was just announced. I work for the comptroller, so I know the numbers. But we have, for lack of better words, a crap ton of money in our budget next year. And I'm just wondering if this is something, if you guys are talking to a lot of communities about their interest in doing this, is it worth these communities coming together and petitioning for just a massive infrastructure project that takes these houses off septic and puts them into a public sewage treatment system with some of this $5 billion? I mean, I just don't think it sounds absurd by any stretch.
No, I think it's a great idea. It extends beyond the boundaries of what we're talking about tonight, and so, but I think it's a tremendous idea if we could free up additional funds. I know we have been talking to the state within the context of BRF funding, and I think the message we've got is there are a lot of demands that arise with each legislative session on those funds.
Even with the BRF funding, it's still cost prohibitive. And in our neighborhood specifically, our home values aren't as significant as the other ones. But we also have a huge amount of original homeowners in this community that are senior citizens. So I'm just wondering, if it's a good idea. I mean, I can talk to Pittman about it or whatever, but is it something that's feasible from a DPW perspective if we were to get some time limited? I mean, let's just say $200 million.
So the short answer is yes. The way the assessment is calculated, we can subtract out any outside funding that's provided for the project. Whether that's
we could put together.
If there was an outside funding source that. Right. In terms of, Kim, you can correct me if I'm off track, but I think it basically is saying the project cost minus outside funding.
So if our community pulled together an idea and went to our state delegates and the county executive and said, can you guys petition the General Assembly for a 3-year, demonstration project grant program that puts, $200 million into septic transfer monies, and then we would apply as a community for a portion of those. If we can bring this down by 50% for the next 3 years, you could offload all of these houses off of septic. And it just makes sense, because then your property value would go up and your taxation would go up, and it's a sustained sort of revenue source. I don't know. It's just an idea. I would understand.
That's correct. I think you're correct on that. If we were able to bring additional funds into play and lower those costs, we could make it more affordable. Like these changes are an improvement, but they're not. They're still. It's still expensive. Yes. Yeah.
Right. And the timeline is a year and a half.
Apologies, Susan. If I could jump in, I know we're just at about 1 hour and 20, and so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We have about 4 more slides to talk through the application process.
Sorry.
And then, Susan, if you're up for staying on, maybe we could spend some time with the technical team talking through options a bit further at that point.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, okay, yeah, you're right. 3 more slides. Okay, so so we have set up a on the Our Water webpage. We've set up what we're calling a community page, and you can get to the page through the link that we have on there. And we should have the slides from tonight's presentation there. There's also going to be a copy of the recording. Within usually about a week, we'll post the recording from tonight's meeting. And you can get to the community webpage. The easiest way is directly through the link. The other way is if you go to the Our Water webpage, there's a septic to sewer drop down. You type in your address, it should pop up and say you're in an eligible area, and there'll be a little blue box that says, go to your community page. The other thing I want to mention is there's a little comment box there where you can tell us if you're interested, you might be interested, or if you're not interested, or you want to leave a comment. As I mentioned, we've been doing a number of presentations kind of throughout the county this year, this summer and into the fall. So, we're trying to give people a lot of information, and we appreciate feedback on things that, maybe could be more clear or explained in a little different way. So let's go to the next slide. So for an application itself, I'm sorry, can you go to the next slide? So the application itself isn't particularly rigorous. It's what we're just looking for is a community name, somebody that would be willing to serve as a contact person, a project area map, and we would work with the contact person on the boundaries of that potential project area, and then some type of show of community support. So there we're kind of want to make sure that there seems to be at least some moderate level interest in the community before we decide to rank it. And we have a lot of flexibility on that. I mean, if the entire area is represented by an HOA, and I'm not sure if that's really the case here, we could work with a letter from an HOA. We could also have a copy of an online poll. And another thing we can look at is if you put your interest or disinterest in the box, on the community webpage, we can look at those results too. So, from that, we don't need 50% to decide that we're going to rank it. We just really kind of want to get an idea that it's not maybe 2 people out of 80 that are interested. So we could go to the next slide, which just talks about how we're going to rank the applications. So this is just so we can decide, which communities that we would be offering the subsidy to. We consider the application valid for several years so that doesn't have to be repeated all the time. And if the community is ranked high, then when next time we do the rankings, hopefully some other communities maybe have connected, and so you can kind of move up for that. So the key things that we're kind of looking at in terms of prioritizing is the total pounds of nitrogen removed, the whether the properties are in the critical area, whether they're in the on-site management problem areas, the dollar per pound removed, and the dollar per house connected. So in this particular neighborhood, since you're not in the critical area, you're not in the problem area, but it could be cost effective. So it might, the score could be pretty competitive from dollar per nitrogen standpoint. And that's really I think that's our final slide, right? Yes. So we had some questions about the water, so we can post that information on the community webpage when we work those estimates up. So that's an easy way. Also, too, if you have some neighbors that maybe couldn't attend, if you can share the web link and so they can take a look at the slides or listen to the recording.
And George, we did have a handful of additional questions as well. The one
Yes.
about the estimate for water and sewer together, which you covered, and that we'll have up on the community page specific. And then question from Bob and Catherine, and I may need you to elaborate a little more on this. Is the clean out in the lawn or inside the home? Did you mean of the...
Now
Go
the
ahead.
clean out, so we have, it should be in our backup slide. There's one about a sewer clean out.
Grab that.
It's probably 5 or 6 slides back.
Yeah, it looks like it's number 46, Jessica.
So the clean out is outside and it's in the lawn, and unless there's some reason it can't be in the lawn. And it's really put at the edge of the public right of way. Want to scroll the other direction.
I think it's coming up as a hidden slide, Jessica. That's why it's not coming through when you click to it.
And it sticks up out of the ground, and it, you know, depending on whether you have a sidewalk or what the width of the county right of way is, kind of where it'll show up. But it would be installed by our contractor, it'd be installed by the county's contractor, but on the private side of the property line. There it is, yeah. So that's a picture from, a different neighborhood, of course, and, but that's a pretty standard installation.
Perfect. And then let's see, an additional question from Graham W. The Seneca sewage and well marks in the yard is more of a concern for me, not to mention the spending to maintain water purification and our own sewage treatment. And so I noted that as a comment. And then Jennifer Grief, the question, is it going to cost more per year for this project than those costs? I think that you're saying are outlined in the slide deck. And as George alluded to during the process, once that application is made, we'll be able to more closely solidify those costs so that before the neighborhood was voting on any sort of movement forward, those would be a bit more finite than they are now in the estimate phase.
Yeah.
And then
I mean, we will update, we would be updating the costs as we moved along. From, right now they're conceptual levels, but we would refine that as we went ahead. Yeah.
And I think a comment related there as well, on the additional cost. So, we've gotten through the formal part of our presentation. We're at about an hour and a half, and sincerely appreciate everyone's time. The technical team, we're happy to hang on if anyone would like to ask us additional questions, either in the chat or verbally. That's what we're here for. But I would encourage everyone to visit your community page website. And as George mentioned, in the next week or so, we'll have the recording of this up. That takes a little bit longer because we match the sort of a written text for anyone who has any disabilities so they can appreciate the presentation as well. And we'll have that additional follow-up information on the combined water and sewer costs there and available, as well as a copy of this slide deck in the outlined neighborhood for application. And then, as George mentioned too, an opportunity to comment to the team as well. And those come directly to all of us. Thank you, Ashley, for your comment. Appreciate it.
I'm totally available to stay on if anybody wants to chat about possible legislation.
Sure.
We'll be here.
Yep, we can have our team, and I appreciate everybody joining us tonight. I know it's a lot of information, and actually a pretty long presentation, so thanks for staying with us.
Thank you all. Have a good evening.